Good evening. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'm Joel Wenger, the political director for Democratic Majority for Israel. On behalf of our entire staff, our president, Mark Melman, and our board and board co-chairs, Ann Lewis and Todd Richmond, whom I believe are joining us tonight, welcome. We hope that you and your loved ones are well and are staying healthy. Before I turn it over to our president, Mark Melman, I'm going to go over a few items. If you like what you're hearing tonight, please check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can see our handles on the screen in front of you. You can also sign up for our news and updates on our website, dmfi.org. We'll take questions during this event, and if you'd like to ask a question, you can submit it using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you are watching on Facebook Live and want to submit a question, you can type it into the comments box. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Melman.
Thank you very much, Joel, and thank you all for being with us. Before I turn it over to our distinguished board member, Representative Alma Hernandez from Arizona, I just want to say a word to give a proper introduction to Congressman Clyburn. I just want to offer a personal word. Congressman and I were actually in a TV studio together shortly after the South Carolina primary. I'm sure he doesn't remember this, but it will be forever engraved in my mind. And I went up to him and said, "Thank God and you. Thank God and you." Because the reality is we needed Joe Biden as our nominee. The other alternative for our party, for our country, and for the U.S.-Israel relationship would have been a disaster. And Jim Clyburn, the whip of the House, single-handedly turned around this election and made Joe Biden's nomination and eventual election possible. So we all owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude for that effort. I can tell you as a political professional, I tell people all the time, endorsements don't always matter that much. This is the endorsement that mattered more than any endorsement ever in political history. So we're very, very grateful. With that, let me turn it to Alma to offer a proper introduction of the congressman.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I will second everything you just said. I remember after I went on Twitter and tagged Congressman Clyburn and said, give the man whatever he wants, because we were so grateful for what you did. Truly, we are very grateful for that. But with that, we are very honored. Our guest today is Congressman Clyburn. He is a majority whip and the third ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives. He previously served in the post from 2007 to 2011 and served as Assistant Democratic Leader from 2011 to 2019. When Majority Whip Clyburn came to Congress in 1993 to represent South Carolina's 6th Congressional District, he was elected co-president of his freshman class and quickly rose through leadership ranks. Over the years, he was subsequently elected chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, vice chair, and later chair of the House Democratic Caucus. From an early age, Majority Whip Clyburn was very active in civil rights issues. He was elected president of his NAACP youth chapter at age 12 and helped organize many civil rights marches and demonstrations as a student leader at South Carolina State College. His memoir, Blessed Experiences, Genuinely Southern, Proudly Black, was published in 2015 and has been described as a primer that should be read by every student interested in pursuing a career in public service. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very kindly for allowing me to be here with you, Mark. Thank you for the relationship we've had over the years. Way back when I first came to Congress, I remember looking for Mark to see what Mark had to say with his polling information in order to get a feel for what I thought might happen. So I thank him for his friendship. I remember him being in Charleston. I don't remember that conversation, but I appreciate him thanking me. But the thanks would probably go to my late wife, who told me at my annual fish fry, which was earlier May that year, 2019. The fish fry was the biggest fish fry we'd ever had. Over 7,000 people there. The fire department cut people off from coming. And of course, we had over 21 presidential candidates. So that night, after the fish fry, my wife did not attend because she was beginning to lose her battle with diabetes. And so when I got home that night, I said to her that I thought we'd had the most successful fish fry we'd ever had. Told her how big the crowd was. And I said to her, I said, no, we're going to have a real problem. There's so many people running for president for the Democratic nomination. And several of them are good friends of ours. We're going to have a very difficult time getting a nominee. She said to me that night, I don't care how many people are running. I don't care how close we are to any of them. If we want to win this election, we had better nominate Joe Biden. And that stuck with me. And though I didn't know exactly when or how I would be doing my endorsement, but that conversation with Emily and the subsequent conversation I had with a lady the Friday before that endorsement contributed to the endorsement being the way it was. So the emotions there came from those two conversations. So my thanks go to those two who framed everything for me and instilled the passion that I needed for the endorsement. So I thank you so much for the way you responded. You didn't expect for Georgia and Arizona to come in the way they did, but they did. And quite frankly, that's why you got so much activity going on out there now. In Georgia, looking and people trying to figure out what happened. We all know what happened. The people decided that this country needed to change directions. And they spoke loudly. When you got 7 million more votes than the other person, but for that little thing we call the Electoral College, it would be considered a landslide election. So thank all of you for what you did in your respective jurisdictions to make Joe Biden our 46th president of these United States. I know that you all have some questions about things, and I'll try to answer them, but just to give you sort of an overview of how I see things here, I think that people are a bit anxious about what's going to happen with the voting issues that are before us. The Senate did its thing on yesterday, and we got a 50-50 vote. That doesn't end anything. That begins it. And we are going to continue to work this issue. Joe Manchin, he's going to stay engaged. Stacey Abrams has endorsed his proposal, so has Barack Obama. And I said the morning afterwards that it's a good step in the right direction, but it's just one step. And so we're going to take some other steps. And I think that we'll get to a point where either we find a workaround of the filibuster, or we'll find a way to involve voting in the reconciliation package. I don't know which one it will be, but I think that what we ought to do is do for constitutional issues like voting what we've done for the budget, and that is to exempt constitutional issues from the filibuster as we've done for the budget. And so I do think that something will be done and we'll get a bill passed. Now, H.R. 1 in its current form may not be what H.R. 1 will be in its final iteration. Same thing may happen with H.R. 4, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. The big thing about the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act is the pre-clearance. The pre-clearance. That's what's the big deal. So I've said to a lot of people, if you put pre-clearance into S1, maybe we can all get what needs to be done in one vote, rather than worrying about trying to pass both bills. So we'll see what happens with that. Now, pre-clearance, as some of you know, means simply that if you're going to make any changes to your voting laws, like changing the congressional district, changing where people vote, changing what time they vote, whatever changes you make, you have to have it pre-cleared by the Justice Department. And that's what the Supreme Court eliminated when it made this decision on the Shelby County versus Holder. Now, one of the things that I've been trying to get people to look at, and that is whether or not pre-clearance needs to have this record that everybody's talking about if it applied to all 50 states. People are debating that. I'm in the corner that says it shouldn't be, since you aren't singling anybody out. All 50 states will have to pre-clear, and 48 states have already passed some kind of restrictive laws that we don't like, then maybe that's the way to go. Lawyers differ on that, and so whether or not we can do that, we'll see. But that's pretty much where the voting stuff is. Now, the other big thing we've got going is so-called infrastructure. And as you know, there's a bipartisan group that's now engaged the White House in its discussions. I don't know where that's going to go, but I do know this. The president had he had first a $2.1 trillion infrastructure bill that the Republicans came with about a $600 billion bill. Neither one of those were going to fly with the other party. So what they've now done, the president has come down to 1.6. They've come up to somewhere 960 billion. And now they're negotiating, and somewhere between 950 billion and 1.6 trillion, I think we'll come up with some kind of a bill. The deal is going to be how you're going to pay for it. Joe Biden has made it very clear. He's not going to pay for it with gasoline tax. And I support that. I think that states like Arizona, South Carolina, or states that will be punished with a gasoline tax. We need to find another way to do it. So we'll see what the pay for is going to be in these bills. But my biggest issue when it comes to infrastructure is broadband. The other side is talking about being for traditional infrastructure. Well, broadband ain't traditional infrastructure. But there was a time when the interstate highway was not traditional infrastructure. Not even the railroads. Until Abraham Lincoln came along with the Transcontinental Railroad, the railroads were not infrastructure. So what we've got to do is be futuristic when we talk about infrastructure. And so I'm pleased that my bill on infrastructure, the Affordable Accessible Broadband for All Act, has been introduced by Amy Klobuchar in the Senate. It's around a $95 billion bill. The White House has proposed somewhere around $100 billion. As of yesterday, this bipartisan committee has put on the table in this infrastructure bill $65 billion for broadband. And that's a significant step in the right direction. We'll see where we go from there, but I do believe that infrastructure will be to the 21st century what electricity was to the 20th century, and it's got to be a part of any infrastructure bill. There's strong support on our side of the aisle to make housing, affordable housing, a part of this infrastructure package. Also, to make school construction part of the infrastructure package. And of course, Joe Biden is talking about family infrastructure as being a thing that we ought to deal with. So in a nutshell, that's what's going on. Now, I know that we've been talking, and I've heard from you about Juneteenth, and you want to hear from me what Juneteenth really means. Well, the interesting thing about Juneteenth is this. There were two emancipation efforts in 1862. One was a piece of legislation passed by the Congress to emancipate the slaves in the District of Columbia. The second one was the Emancipation Proclamation signed in executive order, signed by President Lincoln to be effective January 1, 1863. Now, which meant that all the slaves in those former slave states, not under Union control, would be freed on January 1, 1863. On January 1, 1863, General Saxton stood on the banks of the river down in Beaufort County, South Carolina, and read the Emancipation Proclamation to about 4,000 slaves who gathered to hear the reading of the proclamation freeing them from slavery. However, it was not until June 19, 1865, 2.5 years later, when the word got down to Texas. Now, I've said to people over the years that emancipation or the Juneteenth is a prime example of what happens when you fail to communicate. Nobody told them. They did not know. Whatever may have caused the failure, whether or not it was intentional, I don't know. I would suspect that it was. But whatever the reason was, they didn't know. And so for 2.5 years, they remained in slavery when they had been freed by executive order. So that's what Juneteenth is all about. I was very pleased that in a period of 3 days, we got the bill unanimously adopted by the Senate, and 300 and something to 14 in the House, and of course enrolled by the Speaker of the House, and then signed by the President, all within 3 days. And so we now have 11 federal holidays as a result of Juneteenth. But I would hope that when people celebrate Juneteenth, that they will not forget the value of communicating. When I went to the floor to speak on the bill, I raised this issue about communicating. One of the members on the other side of the aisle was a bit upset about the name of the bill, said he was all for it, but he thought that the use of the word independence set up a dichotomy that should not exist, because we all should have one Independence Day. I agree with that. And I said to him that it's a shame that you did not communicate your concern to us. We may have been able to resolve that. If that was a problem for you, just tell us. If we communicate, we can solve these problems. If you don't communicate, you can't get it done. So Juneteenth to me is all about communicating or the failure to communicate. So Juneteenth was celebrated big time in Texas for years. Where I grew up in South Carolina, we already celebrate January 1, Emancipation Day. When I moved to Charleston back in 1962, the biggest parade in Charleston was not Christmas parade, it was the Emancipation Day parade. So Juneteenth was basically a Texas celebration, but people began to adopt it all over the country, and it's now become a national holiday. So I want to thank you all for having me here, and I know that you have some questions. I'll stop now and respond to any questions. I say respond because I got Matthew Ellison here with me, who's my policy director. He knows these issues much better than I do. So I'll respond to him and he'll answer them.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much, Congressman. As a reminder, if you have questions, you can put them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if you're on Facebook, you can add them to the comments on Facebook. The first question we have, you mentioned it was a matter of 3 days really where Juneteenth was made into a national holiday, and you were an instrumental part of this effort. Can you give us a little bit of a behind the scenes look into how it all came together so quickly?
Well, it's kind of interesting because all of a sudden, the Senate acted, the bill was introduced in the Senate by Senator Cornyn from Texas and Markley from Massachusetts. And that bill had been sitting over there. And there was an objection. Ron Johnson up in Wisconsin had placed a hold on the bill. And all of a sudden, he released the hold. I don't know why. I don't know whether he said he just came to the conclusion that he was not going to be able to stop it forever. And so he released the hold. I went to Cornyn and I asked him. I said, were you surprised by that? And he said to me, yes, he was. He said somebody came to him and told him that he had just released it. And when he did that, they immediately moved to approve it as they can do in the Senate. So before the day was over, they had passed it. Sent it to the House. So when it got over the House as the whip, I was consulted with by Senator Hoyer, who had to make the decision as to what time or when it should go to the floor. And there were some people talking about doing it the following week. I said, well, why should we do it after the 19th if we could do it before? And so the decision was made to just bring it to the floor. And of course, the speaker gave her blessings to it, and we scheduled it for a vote. We voted on it. It passed. And then the next morning, Nancy Pelosi sat down in the Rayburn room and had an enrollment ceremony, signed it. And then we all went over to the White House at 3:30 in the afternoon for the president to sign it. So there was no real behind the scenes intrigue here. It was just a decision made that let's just put this on the fastest track we can put it on and get it done. And so it was amazing to me because I flew out to Kansas City, Missouri, Thursday afternoon. I did get the Harry Truman Good Neighbor Award, which is the annual award given by the Truman Foundation. And when I landed in Kansas City around 9:30 their time, I was made aware that federal employees, judges and all were having conference calls right after the president signed the bill, which is around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 2:30 out there. They all got together and said, we're closing down all the federal buildings tomorrow. So I suspect that may be the fastest celebration of a national holiday that ever took place, because all over the country, here in Washington as well, I think the federal employees were waiting on the day off, and they got it. So in 4 days, we went all the way from a proposal to celebrate and not just the signing of the bill, but actually celebrating the holiday.
Awesome. So first up, I just want to share some well wishes from one of our supporters, Andrew, who wanted to share, dear Rep. Clyburn, thank you for saving this nation and for saving the Democratic Party. I want to go to one more question from Mark. He says, Congressman, thank you so much for your work on behalf of voting rights and the Juneteenth legislation. How do you think those of us who will benefit from that holiday with a day off of work should best use that day to reflect on the principles and history that led to the holiday being created?
Well, that's a great question. And that's exactly what I was talking about communicating. Look, this big phenomenon floating around now about critical race, whatever they call it. Look, when I spoke on the floor on this bill, I talked about communicating as I just spoke here today. And I said to them, I said, no, I don't think all of us know that they were all sitting in our Capitol building that we call the citadel of democracy. That building was built by slaves. I don't know, nobody is trying to shame anybody when they say that's a history that people ought not try to hide. I went on with my speech that day to tell the story of a man named Philip Reed. Philip Reed was a slave in Charleston, South Carolina, was bought and brought to Washington, D.C., worked in a foundry. It turned out that that foundry was selected to do the statue that we call Lady Liberty that sit on top of the Capitol. And when that statue was finished, and they took it to the Capitol grounds, they couldn't get it on top of the building. They tried and could not get Lady Liberty up there. Philip Reed, who was at that point enslaved, Philip Reed, who had been denied the opportunity to learn to read and write. He knew geometry. And he showed them how to get that statue on top of the Capitol. I talked about that. And I don't see, that's not shaming anybody. The shame is that people don't know that. And there's so much about our history that we need to be known, that needed to be known because, as George Santayana once admonished, if we fail to learn the lessons of history, we're bound to repeat them. And you can't learn history's lessons unless you learn the historical events. That's how you glean the lessons when you know what those events were all about. So I think that anybody celebrating Juneteenth ought to look at what caused Juneteenth. It was caused by the failure to communicate. And that, to me, is what we ought to rededicate ourselves to every time we think about that holiday, every time we celebrate that holiday. What can I do to improve the communication that exists between Christians and Jews, between Catholics and Protestants, between Buddhists and Muslims, between Blacks and whites, brown and yellow. That's what we ought to do. When you celebrate Juneteenth, what can I do to improve communication among the diversity of people that exist in this country?
Awesome. Congressman, do we have time to go do one more question? I know you've got a busy schedule this evening.
Sure.
All right. So this one comes from Barry. He says, Congressman, thank you for all you have done over the years, and particularly in the last election. My question, germane to the Juneteenth discussion, is what can we do to build upon the natural alliance between African Americans and the American Jewish community? Both groups have suffered enslavement and persecution over centuries. There has been and should be a natural alliance. Yet some leaders of the BLM movement have strayed from the important domestic agenda that the movement was created to address, and instead waded into the morass of Middle East politics with anti-Israel rhetoric and at times outright anti-Semitism. What do you think that can be done to educate people about the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian situation and to help build bridges to better address the crucial domestic challenges without creating friction, exacerbating the increase of anti-Semitism that has once again reared its ugly head?
Well, I spent a little time yesterday with David Wasserman Schultz, who's one of my chief deputy whips. I've known David since he arrived in Congress. In fact, before we met, but after she won the Democratic primary in a race down there in Florida, and came to Washington. So even before she got elected, we developed a relationship. And it might have been their very first outside of her congressional district event she ever did was at my invitation down in Charleston. And so I had a long talk with her on yesterday. And we were talking about what we can do to improve the atmosphere that exists and what we can do to really bring to people's attention what we can do to lower the tension that seems to be developing. There's so much anti-Semitic language coming from people, just as we've seen what's happening with Asians, and we've done stuff about that. We've done stuff what happened with African Americans. All of these things are very, very important. When I was growing up, I grew up in a parsonage. My father was a fundamentalist Christian minister. And when I was about to go off to college, my dad and I talked a lot. My dad spent a lot of time with me, training me to be a leader. But I think I know, he thought I would be a pastor. In fact, he wanted me. We talked about it. But now I went to school. I was in school, I finished high school in 1957. And so I went off to college. And I was there. John Lewis and I met in October 1960. So I was one of the founding members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And of course, I need not tell you about all that. So John and I developed this very close relationship. And I went home to tell my dad that I had decided that I was not going to go to the seminary. I thought he would be disappointed. He may have been, but he said to me on that day, well, son, he said, I suspect the world would much rather see a sermon than to hear one. And that stayed with me and is still with me. And my dad, who preached as much from the Old Testament as he did from the New. When I was speaking to the prayer breakfast, I was invited for the third time to speak at the prayer breakfast that meets on in the Capitol on the first floor there every Thursday morning. I was going to be introduced by Charlie Crist, the former governor of Florida, who's now a member of Congress and just announced he's going to go back home and run for governor again. Charlie Crist came to me and said, I'm going to be introducing you in the morning. I want to do so by using your favorite Bible verse. And I told him, my favorite Bible verse is Micah 6:8. And he paused and looked at me, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. And I said, Charlie, I know what you're thinking. This guy had grown up in a Christian parsonage, and he's giving you an Old Testament scripture as his favorite Bible verse. I said, but that's the way it is. And we talked about that a little later. So I think that when we know more about each other, like I knew about slavery and Jews all of my life, And so I didn't have to be made sensitive to that issue. My dad made me sensitive to that issue, aside from making me read the Bible through and through more than once. So I just think that the key to this is to allow ourselves the benefit of knowing each other. And this is not only about religion or about politics. I went through this with my wife. My wife and I met in jail. I met John Lewis in October 1960. I met my wife in jail March 15th, 1960. We stayed married for 58 years before she lost her battle with diabetes. We grew up totally different. She grew up on a little farm down in Berkeley County, South Carolina. She used to walk 2.5 miles to school every morning. I grew up on a paved street in Sumter, South Carolina, 3 blocks from my elementary school, 6 blocks from my middle school, and I'm a graduate of Mather Academy, which would be called a boarding school in those days, where my dormitory was about 25 steps from my academic building. So when I spoke out against busing, as I did, when Charlotte v. Mecklenburg decision came down and Judge McMillan wrote his decision, I disagreed with it publicly. But when I got home that night, my wife sat me down and she explained to me how wrong I was in speaking out against busing. And she told me about her experience in walking 2.5 miles every day when the white kids had buses. And so because I had never ridden a school bus to school, I didn't know what that meant. So I didn't have that kind of experience. And so we don't have the same experience. No two people will have the same experience. It might be very close and it might be similar, but we don't have the same experiences. And that's what makes us who and what we are. And so I think that if we can improve the communication, getting to know each other and develop an appreciation for those experiences, we'll do better. And I think that that's what will get us to where we need to be. We can dress it up in the way we want to, but it all comes down to whether or not we can really put ourselves in other people's positions just a little bit. I closed I wrote in the epilogue to my book. It was an open letter to my children and grandchildren. And I said to them in that letter that if you want to go into business, get to know the people that you want to sell your goods or services to. If you want to go into politics, get to know the people who you want to vote for you. Don't go around trying to get people to understand you. You spend your time understanding them. And if you do that, you will be served much better in life. And I think that holds true for everybody. So I think that part of my job, I can't be a good whip unless I learn the people I'm trying to get the votes from. And I cannot be a good person unless I learn and understand the people that I want to interact with. I think that all too often, we spend all of our time trying to get people to understand us when we ought to be spending our time understanding them. And I think that everybody may not have had the same kind of experience that I've had with the Jewish faith and with Jews. And I'll close with this. When I was living in Charleston, I went to Charleston right out of college. And I became director of the Neighborhood Youth Corps and New Careers program when I was 25 years old. It shocked a lot of people, including me, when that board hired me. But not long after I was hired, I received a phone call from a lady, Rowena Tobias. Rowena Tobias' father, if my memory serves, was the founder of the oldest temple, the Jewish temple down in Charleston. I didn't know her. I knew her name, but she called me, invited me to tea. She lived down on South Battery down in Charleston. I went to her house, tea. I didn't know anything about going to no tea, but I went, and she said to me on that day, now I didn't know this lady was watching me, but she told me she'd been watching me for a period of time, and she thought that I had a tremendous future in public service. And she told me the story of Charleston and where Charleston stood on the economic sphere for so many years. And she said to me, the reason Charleston lost its standing was because no matter what would happen in Charleston, people would sit down and talk about it, work their way through it, except for one thing, and that was the question of race. Whenever the question of race came up, people would stop talking. She said, we cannot solve this problem with race if people refuse to talk. And she said to me on that day, I want you to make me a promise that wherever you go in life, I want you to promise me that you won't stop talking. I promised her that day that I won't stop talking. And that's why sometimes I talk too much today, as I did in answering that last question. But thank you guys for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much, Congressman. And I think a number of folks have commented in the Q&A how appreciative they are for your words and how they plan to share them with people that they know as well. But to close this out, I'd like to turn it over to one of our board co-chairs, the aforementioned Ann Lewis, to have some closing words for everybody.
Thank you so much, Congressman Clyburn, for being with us today. And let me say, I wish you could just keep talking, but I suspect you got some other work to do. Thank you for teaching us about Juneteenth and for your leadership, not just today, but every day. And I think everybody here knows it. In the Congress and in the Democratic Party, you are a force for a better America, and we appreciate you. So thank you. Now, to all those I can't see today, thank you for joining us and for your support of DMFI. A reminder, gentle reminder, while you're still at a screen, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And just keep in mind what Congressman Clyburn said about the importance of communicating. We're trying to live up to those words. You can also go to dmfi.org, that's dmfi.org, visit our Take Action Center to make your voice heard. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to hosting you again.